Okay, the opinion with Michael J. Good to see you. Going to start right away. We're going to start off with the Bulwark. And one of the lead gentlemen of the Bulwark, a guy by the name of Tim Miller, he actually does a pretty good job with Kerry Lake, which I envy him for. And as a matter of fact, he did such a good job, Kerry wanted to give him a hug. Yikes. Just the thought of that just... I lost a couple days there. Anyway, we're going to go to the main screen, and I call it the Two-Pane. Donald J. Trump Unbound Expose, the continuing saga of the... was it the 47th president now of the United States of America? Donald J. Strump? Good golly. Am I making fun of your American president? Sorry, guys. Can't help it. So anyways, the byline here, could be my byline as well. 51st state, Trudeau on the outs, bowing to Trump. Like who? Trump's an idiot. He's illiterate. Doesn't even know what a trade deficit is. He really does not know what a trade deficit is. He uses a tariff like it's a baseball bat. And what can I say? Herbert Hoover probably had a higher IQ than this guy. So let's start with Tim.
Hey y'all, it's Tim Miller from the Bulwark, and crazy shit is happening in Canada. Donald Trump's talking about making it a state. Ministers are resigning. Justin Trudeau might be going down. And so I wanted to bring in the obvious person to discuss this with, YouTube's #1 Canadian expert. He's JJ McCullough. I'm sure you've seen him on the JJ.
Hold on a second. I'm going to put an objection out there. I'm sure JJ's a fine young gentleman. He's a bit of a trim there. But here's the thing. I'm going to provide a few contrasts because my experiences are a little different from JJ's. And so I'm going to give an arbitrary and subjective analysis. It's going to be my own. And you're going to see where it comes from, where it's going, and what we're going to do.
McCullough YouTube channel with all of his knickknacks and his obsession with interesting pop cultural totems and The Simpsons and other things such as that. But most importantly, he is the internet's #1 expert on Canuck affairs. So thank you, JJ, for coming to educate us.
Thanks for having me.
You know, all these Canadians with their beady little eyes.
You Canadians are all the same with your beady little eyes and flapping heads.
Don't you start
It's
with
just
that
hard to
self-part
even know
BS,
what's happening
buddy.
up there sometimes down here in the States.
Never
And
watched
we
that.
do have a decent amount of Canadian viewers that I hear from. And you guys like are obsessed with us, kind of. And like can name
No, Tim, I'm not obsessed. We are not obsessed with you. I have been following American politics since the early 1990s. Yeah, the early 1990s. When I used to go to the east coast of Florida every March. Just saying.
random American senators. And I am ostensibly an American political expert and know literally nothing about what is happening out there. I'd never even heard of this finance minister who resigned. So I'm hoping that you can educate us ugly Americans a little bit, if that's okay.
Well, I mean, it's interesting that you've never heard of her because she was actually sort of made her name for herself as an American political commentator. Chrystia Freeland spent a great deal of time working for U.S.-based publications, spent
Like
a lot
what?
of time, like The Economist and the Financial Times and things of this sort. I mean, I guess these are British-based things, but, you know, they...
The Economist and Financial Times, you should know about, especially the Financial Times and the Economist, both British. But the other thing that you may want to use as a barometer is the Wall Street Journal back in the 90s and Barron's, a magazine called Barron's.
Had a profile in America. She was sort of part of the Aspen set, the big ideas kind of crowd. Sort of made her a great sort of enemy of the anti-globalist scene because she's sort of seen as the rootless cosmopolitan extraordinaire. But anyway, for that reason, she was a very high-profile get for Prime Minister Trudeau when he made her foreign minister and then most recently finance minister. You know, she was supposedly brought a lot of sort of star power to his cabinet. And so the fact that she quit under sort of threat of being fired by the prime minister yesterday was why this was sort of such an explosive development. She was also deputy prime minister, which is sort of an additional kind of meaningless title that high profile cabinet ministers get. But, you know, Trudeau has had a tense relationship with a lot of his finance ministers. And, you know, one of the reasons why Trudeau is so terribly unpopular right now, a poll came out today suggesting that the number of Canadians that want to see him reelected to a fourth term is 11%. You know, one of the reasons why his numbers are so rock bottom is because his fiscal record has, you know, really sort of hung around his neck in a negative way. You know, the Canadian economy is not in great shape. We've had a sort of long period of stagnant growth.
Let's be honest. Inflation worldwide caused irreparable damage. We've seen a far right-wing push all around the world. Doesn't matter where it is because of inflation. You can sugarcoat this any which way you want, but it's all about inflation. That's the real root of the issue.
Growth, you know, wages have not kept up with inflation. You know, the legacy of inflation lasted longer here than it did in the States. You know, unemployment remains high. So, like, there's a lot of sort of economic...
On a pro rata basis, compared to America, we did quite well versus the rest of Europe and everywhere else. And those are the facts. You can just pull out the graphs. I got the graphs somewhere, but I'm not going to go into it.
Sort of problems, in addition to sort of out-of-control spending that's led to a very dramatic a deficit that's far higher than Trudeau ever promised, which is what Minister Freeland was supposed to reveal to the public yesterday. She was supposed to sort of unveil this horribly gigantic $60 billion deficit. But, you know, instead she quit. She said that she doesn't really have faith in the prime minister's economic leadership.
No, it's projected to be 40+ billion deficit. That projection's been out there for a long time. Ended up being maybe 50% more, as he said, 61 point something. But nonetheless, the girl, yeah, she quit. He was looking, he asked to put her in a different position in cabinet. And this is just before she's supposed to put out a major press release on the budget. So instead, she quits, sends him a letter, and does it that way. So, you know, instead of her leaning in and working with her party, she just caved like most people have, because the political climate is a lot different now than it was a couple of years ago. It's more of a Donald Trump-esque political climate here, just like in the U.S. and around the world. You've got a far right-wing push, and it's all because of inflation. Simple as that.
And this sort of went off like a bomb. It really just makes it seem like Trudeau really has very few allies in his corner, that Trudeau's own party has very little faith in his leadership. So it's just one more sort of reminder that this is a government with sort of one foot in the proverbial political grave.
Holy crap. Is he talking about the Liberal Party of Canada, or is he talking about the Democrats? There is a parallel there, guys.
And, you know, the clock is just ticking until he loses his bid for a fourth term.
All right. I want to get back to Freeland, particularly the part that she was an American media personality, because now I have
piqued his interest.
I'm starting to imagine in my head, daydream about maybe I might have a future as a Canadian minister of some kind, given the fascination with American media personalities. But before
Tim,
we get into
do you really want to come to the far north? Do you really want to make that trek? You know, I remember going to Philadelphia in 1968 or 69. And everybody there thought we lived in igloos. Can you believe that? Thought we lived in igloos. And spoke French. Parlez-vous français, monsieur?
Like the details, like what happened there, and the Trump, kind of the weird Trump bleat about this resignation and the Trump-Trudeau dance. I just, like, for people like that haven't been following what's happening out there closely enough that like some of the stuff you just said might be a surprise. So like Trudeau is at 11%. Right? Like Canada has this reputation as being liberal. I mean, Trudeau's been there forever. So his unpopularity, is it just based around inflation? Are there other ways in which he's unpopular? I had a Canadian come up to me in the airport recently and say that they're very worried about a mini Trump emerging in Canada. Like, is that?
Yeah, mini Trump is this Pierre Poilievre, and they're right. And they're right. They're swinging right. Conservative Party, MAGA. The guy's doing the exact same thing. He's taking the blueprint of Trump. Nothing but negative, negative, negative. Has no plan, has some concepts, and tax breaks, the old tax break. Nothing innovative, no zero-sum economics, infrastructure spending designed in such a way to stimulate growth. But also another thing you got to remember, Tim, Canada has about 1/10 the GDP in the population of the United States of America. And this is where everybody gets got up in the sway. Even though we got a lot of land mass, you got to understand there's only 40 million people, and that's with an insurgence, a great insurgence over the last 5 years of immigrants.
Is that possible? Is that overstated? So I'm just curious, like for a basic like poli-sci 101, Trudeau is unpopular. You obviously do elections differently in Canada. What is the political landscape if you were to resign, or if there were snap elections to come? Like, who would be the options to replace him? Is there a Canadian Trump?
Yeah, the Canadian Trump, Pierre Poilievre, Conservative Party of Canada, is the guy that's going to win. We'd rather wait till October 2025. And the reason why I'd like to wait is because the third party, because we've got more than two parties, the third party, which is led by a guy by the name of Singh, who's a Sikh, NDP party, New Democrat Party, has been bolstering up the Liberal Party to keep them in power. But the things he's had to agree to the NDP to stay in power go against Chrystia Freeland's sense of prudence, especially now considering the Trump tariffs. Now, the other thing you have to take into consideration is like we have premiers like you have governors. And a lot of these premiers are conservative as well. They're all jockeying to move up to the highest seat in kingdom, which is the prime minister. Everybody's always jockeying to get up. And so you got the mantra on the provincial level, which would be the state level as well. So you've got those influences. And it's always cut taxes, give the corporations good breaks, and same thing as the Republican Party, not much different. And that's where it's at.
Trump lurking, like give us just the 101 basics on the political state of play right now.
Well, the political state of play. So Trudeau was elected in 2015, unseating a conservative government. He was a bit of a political neophyte, Trudeau.
And he's still a little wet behind the ears, but he is a more seasoned veteran than anybody there right now on any party. And that's where the support would be great if he can get an October election to allow for the time for Trump to do some of the things he's going to do that'll actually shed a different light on how he's viewed and his policies and how the conservative policies around the world and in Canada may not be all that great after all. So that's where time needs to be on the side of the Canadian Prime Minister, because now he's got a little bit of asparagus, and that's experience under his feet. And that's where time needs to be on his side. Now, if we had an election today, Conservative Party, Pierre Poilievre, majority, probably a landslide. And then second would be NDP, maybe with about 26 seats, and the Liberals are 23 seats. And I'm not going to be far off the mark. That's what's going to happen. If an election was today, that's probably where it would be. Simple as that.
Did not have a long political career. I mean, your older viewers might know that Justin Trudeau is the son of Pierre Elliott Trudeau, who was prime minister for 15 years, was this very sort of domineering figure in Canadian politics for a very long time. And, Trudeau, as a young man, was a bit of a sort of political dilettante. He's obviously very sort of handsome and charismatic, and he sort of rode that to his first...
Yeah, he had a certain je ne sais quoi. He was the only one to give... Tricky Dicky Nixon the finger, which was created quite a thing in the papers around the world at the time.
Term in 2015, sort of promising, the famous line was, sunny ways, much more sort of progressive, forward-looking government than the one that we had previously had. And, then he was reelected to a second term in 2019, and then he was elected to a third term in 2021, a sort of COVID-era election that he used his prime ministerial powers, which is a weird power that they have in the Canadian system, to call an early election. He said it was vital that we have an election sort of to deal with the future of COVID, which is one of the reasons why people are saying that we should have an early election now to deal with sort of the Trump threat. But anyway, the point is that as Trudeau has, been elected and reelected, I think that like any sort of incumbent government, people are starting to get a little sick of him. He was elected in a different political context than the one we sort of face ourselves in now. I think there's a kind of sense that Trudeau has achieved a lot of his marquee promises, very few of which ever had to do much with economic.
And can you actually relate any marquee promise? The fact of the matter is the electorate, whether it be in the United States or Canada or Europe, they forget real fast. There's a high level of ignorance. All people care about is the almighty dollar. And the real bottom line is inflation's been the real driver of this political shift around the world.
Management, but obviously sort of post-COVID, his numbers have never recovered because, this was a crisis that I think his political skill set was never particularly equipped to deal with. And
who in the world had the skill set to deal with it? We haven't had a thing like this in 100 years. He actually did quite well. And I remember it happened. I remember when Trump, I couldn't believe Trump was actually had a chance to win. I watched all the friggin' debates with Clinton. The guy was totally outclassed. And then he won. And I thought, holy crap. And I talked to a political science professor here at a major university. And I explained to him, well, let's see what happens. But I also did explain to him my concern because Paul Manafort, and this is a thing that nobody understands. And this, now we're going to go back to the American side of things. Because I'm going to tell you the Russian connection with Trump came from Canada. You're going to say, what? Yeah. So I'm just going to lay that on you. I'm going to bring more out into the table in the near future and lay it on you, Americans. But the Russian hoax was real. Paul Manafort was a proxy, laundering money for the Russians, putting their man in place to control Ukraine. They had oligarchs in high place of business, finance. This is how they do it around the world. And I'm going to tell you another thing. The Russian propaganda has been working the U.S. and the Canadians and the world. And don't think for a second it hasn't. Especially with social media now. Social media is a tool that has really underestimated the potential to influence. And this is where everybody, since 2016, that's where the gap's widened. If you understand how important social media is to get the message of your party out, you're going to do well. But if you don't, you're not going to. Russian propaganda understands the social media. They know the demographics of the Midwest United States. They're familiar with it with Canada because it's all a lot to do with organized crime. But the demographics are the same as the people in Russia. So the playbook in Russia worked. They put it in play in the United States and the Midwest. It worked there, worked in Canada. I've seen it over and over.
The Canadian economy has dealt with the aftermath of sort of the COVID era recession and has never really fully recovered. And it doesn't seem like this government has much of a strategy for, pulling us out of it. His numbers have accordingly declined. And this has overlapped with the Conservative Party, which lost 3 elections in a row to Trudeau, has a new candidate for Prime Minister, Pierre Poilievre, who is...
Okay, before we get into Pierre Poilievre, understand Trudeau has put a lot of cards in the immigration basket to help bail them out. It's worked out, but the investment he's put into it is going to take longer to pay back, and it's going to take longer time. It's not immediate payback. It's not immediate in the way that they need. Simple as that.
Is quite popular with Canadians in a way that the previous 3 Conservative candidates were not. Pierre Poilievre is a somewhat sort of pugilistic, populist kind of character. I mean, I don't think that, there's a one-to-one analogy with Trump, but, certainly he has some aspects that are probably somewhat
Does he have
evocative.
hats that say MCGA?
There are actually people that have, not Pierre's people, but there are sort of people in Canada.
No, Pierre's slogan is, bring it home. Have I hit a tender root? Make America great again? Pierre Poilievre? Bring it home? Think about it.
Canada that are trying to make Canada great again, a slogan and this sort of thing. I mean, Trudeau's people actually use that as a slur against Pierre.
Sure.
Because I think that Pierre's popularity is such, that the Liberal Party, Trudeau's Liberal Party, is really quite desperate for anything to kind of curb his momentum. If there was an election held today, the polls suggest that Pierre Poilievre might win the largest landslide in Canadian political history. So he's really sort of got the wind at his back. But
Poilievre would win.
So when would the actual election
No doubt
be?
about it.
When is it? When
It's
is
supposed to be
October 2025.
It's supposed to be in October of 2025. So it's still quite a ways away, right? But
is there a natural successor to Trudeau in the Liberal side of the party if you decided to step aside and pass the torch, as we said down here?
Well, I mean, it would have been, I think, Chrystia Freeland. It still might be.
No, but he did put in place as the new finance minister a guy by the name of Dominic LeBlanc, which, given some time with Trudeau and a different game plan, providing the election there's not a non-confidence vote and the election's held October, give them the chance to maybe pull into a minority position of leadership. Slim chance, but there is that chance.
Chrystia Freeland, the deputy prime minister. I mean, I think she is still popular with the Liberal base. There was a sort of story that the Liberal Party had a kind of closed door conference meeting.
Let's look at another thing from a different perspective. You got to understand. Let's not make the same mistake the United States made, the Democratic Party made. Kamala Harris, what surprised me the most was how many women would not vote for a woman. Didn't think a woman should be in that capacity. Don't make the same mistake, a way of thinking here in Canada as well. Population's still not ready for a woman. There's too many men, too many egotistical males still in the population around the world. Simple as that.
Meeting yesterday in Ottawa, and apparently when former Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland sort of strides in, she gets a rounding sort of standing O. So I think
she
that
did a good job.
She
No
had the
doubt
guts
about
to
it.
do something.
Like, where do those meetings happen? Is it like a moose lodge?
No, in an igloo, of course, right?
An igloo.
So,
No, let those episodes of Fred Flintstone pass, Tim. Don't hold on to them. Let them go, sir. Moose Lodge. Holy frick. Masonic Temple? Yikes.
yes, which we go to by our dog sleds. And no, but so I think there is a sense that, Chrystia Freeland had sort of the guts to do something that a lot of politicians in Trudeau's party have not had the guts to do, which is sort of like kind of call him out to his face, saying this government is on the wrong path economically. We need to have sort of a better sort of fiscal plan in order to sort of repair our reputation with Canadians and so forth. And so I do think that if he was to step down, she would probably be, one of the front runners. But, there's other sort of cabinet people
But then is she more of like, would you describe her, as more centrist? Is she more of like is it a Tony Blair, kind of Bill Clinton era move to neoliberalism, or is it not even is it just more provincial kind of differences that don't really map onto global political whatever, ideological
fiscal.
Well, I mean, you hit on something that I think is actually quite important, which is the idea that Chrystia Freeland is sort of being celebrated as this great hero, a woman who sort of stood up for sort of fiscal sense in the face of a Trudeau government that's doing all sorts of irresponsible things. But that said, she was finance minister for quite a while. I mean, she was very much the
Kamala issue here.
Yeah, precisely, absolutely. Yeah. I think there's actually a lot of analogies between Biden and Kamala and the situation that Trudeau is going through right now.
No
right?
shit,
Could
Sherlock.
we scrape up any cabinet minister who could, lag a party or sort of revive a party that's at 11%?
in a rush, who's going to friggin' patch the holes in the ship there, buddy? No one. Your best bet, and best for the country, and best geopolitically, would be put Trudeau back in a minority position with the NDP and this guy Singh get over his friggin' ego a bit, work together, be a little more pragmatic. But mind you, Singh has brought together some good things for the people of Canada also in certain ways that no conservative government will. But the problem is this guy Singh and the NDP have ambitions of being number one, and they're not going to be number one. And this is where it's a fail if they're not careful. And the best thing they could do is keep propping up the Liberals, wait till October, and maybe be able to work in a minority situation going forward. And that'll give the time for the NDP to become more mature as a party, and the leader a little more mature in how to promote what's necessary and best for Canadian people. Simple as that.
There's also the case where it's, in the Canadian system, for some reason, we don't tend, when an incumbent government sort of steps aside, or when an incumbent prime minister steps aside, he doesn't just do what Biden did and sort of say, I'm going to opt out of the race. No, what the incumbent prime ministers tend to do in Canada is they opt out of the prime ministership altogether. So this would be like the equivalent if Biden resigned the presidency and then Kamala was running as incumbent president, right? For some reason, that's how it is in Canada. I don't like this tradition. I think that it doesn't.
Hey, hold on a sec. I don't care what you like or you don't like. The fact of the matter is you have debates, and the leader of the party, they discuss back and forth is very, very important. If you did that in the United States, how well do you think Trump would fare in sparring on a daily basis back and forth with the leader of the opposition? So you got to look at the bigger picture here there, JJ.
Doesn't even make sense politically, because people, in the same way people resented Kamala for being, quote unquote, an unelected candidate, people resent someone who's an unelected prime minister who's running for re-election when they were never elected to that term in the first place. And so I mean, my just general sense is that this party is kind of done. They're just trying to delay the inevitable. There's gimmicky things they can do, but
the gimmicky things are because of the Conservatives on the provincial level that are actually working, and the same gimmicky things that Trump did that actually worked. And this is where people don't get it. And this is where the parallels are and where the similarities are. When Trump, with the PPP checks, the payroll plan checks, he delayed them, a little bit of time so he could put his name on the checks. That left an imprint, a suggestion in the brain, created an event in the brain of the people that the checks came from Donald Trump. And this, you guys don't understand how, the brain works and how these things work. KGB, FSB, they've got a lot more experience in brainwashing and all sorts of different things. Why do you think this guy Trump's on the phone all the time with Putin? Putin's got to tell him what to do all the time, over and over and over and over again. If you really think Trump is all that smart, here's a guy who doesn't even know what a trade deficit is. A trade deficit is he thinks he's lent money. Instead, all you've done is brought products in that your country doesn't produce. He thinks you're giving money away. You're extending credit. This is how dumb this guy is. And then immigration asylum seekers, he thinks they're coming from mental institutions, mental health asylum seekers. This is what you do not understand about the president, Donald J. Trump, and what motivates him. That's why these tariffs, tariffs are good. Doesn't understand how tariffs work. Maybe he understands when he's petitioned by washing machine companies because LG, South Korean companies, the way they're doing things, that's a different story. That's a different way of using tariffs. But he thinks because he got a trade deficit, the same way with friggin' Adolf Spice in 1930, Germany thought the trade deficits were loaning money. No. That's why he had that big war, Second World War. Guy with the biggest club. Well, we're going to get our resources. This is how we get our resources. Trade deficits. You're not loaning any money. The guy doesn't even know what a trade deficit really is. He's creating pain and suffering, and pain and suffering is not needed because of ignorance. Simple.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically, I think that the best thing they can do is just pull the bandage off. You know, like I said earlier, Trudeau has the power to call an early election. If he called an early election, you know, he could run for the fourth term that he says he wants to do. He could give it his best shot, and he could lose with dignity, because the alternative is to just continue this drama going on for months and months and months and months, making him just more and more unpopular, you know, continuing to poison what remains of his legacy.
If you're at 11%, don't kid yourself. If you're at 11%, you want to work the clock. This dignity thing's bullshit.
All right, so I want to get to Trump, but one more thing on this that is confusing to some of us down in the States, which is,
oh no,
what is the, like, who is this conservative candidate appealing to? Right? Is there a populist conservative strain in Canadian politics that is kind of emerging, as we've seen?
Yeah, it's emerging. The demographics are very similar to the people that placed Trump in power. This is a worldwide situation. It's not just United States. It's Canada. It's in Europe. It's in a lot of different countries around the world. But the other thing that you've got to understand, Tim, the Russian propaganda machine has been working harder and a lot stronger than people realize. That's the real issue. And that's helped create this nationalist movement.
In other countries where there's interest in this, and you know that there is a pivot in Canada to having maybe a more of a populist conservative future, like, or is this just like people are so unhappy with the status quo and like this other guy is the guy that's there?
That's because there's an international neoliberal movement going on, where they've seen the average Joe has seen his wages get hurt. And then these conservatives are promising the moon. We will give you the moon. And they give them the tax breaks. Doesn't matter if it raises the debt of the country by $8 trillion, but they get the tax breaks. So they feel they're rewarded. And this is how they get the vote. Same thing in the U.S., same in Canada, same in Europe, around the world. Same thing.
I think it's much more the latter. You know, I think that I was thinking about this today when I was walking around before I did this.
Walking around.
You know, I think that the American political situation has kind of scrambled a lot of our brains in ways that are kind of difficult to recover from. And I think one of the ways that it's kind of scrambled our collective brains is that we've kind of assumed that like the political right is always wrong about everything, right? And that the political left is kind of like or at least the sort of incumbent sort of center-left party is always right and is kind of like, a sort of saintly party versus a sinister party. And I often hear like Americans sort of say like, oh, I wish we could get back to normal politics like you guys have in Canada. Like I hate sort of American politics. It's become so chaotic and insane. But the fact is that like in normal politics, you sometimes just have to deal with like normal bread and butter sort of economic matters. Yeah. And I think just the objective reality is that Justin Trudeau has not been a particularly great prime minister, has not been particularly great on the economic management of this country.
Who has? You had a pandemic that started the third quarter of 2019, became public the start of 2020. We haven't seen such a pandemic for over 100 years. And the degree that it affected the supply chain around the world created an inflation boondoggle. So let's be real about what happened. So it created an inflation spike around the world. What nobody had the wherewithal to do was to modify the financial system so that you dealt with inflation differently and price controls went into effect. You showed you could do it in 2008 with the bailout of the car manufacturers. What nobody tells you about, I'm going to pivot here, in 2017, 2018, the tariff fight with China. So you had $7.8 trillion go to tax breaks to the lower income Americans, $7.8 trillion. And a lot went to corporate U.S. that never trickles down. Then you had a bailout to the farmers in the Midwest for the soybean fiasco tariff situation with China to the tune of $28 billion. Permanently lost that business. Yeah, brilliant tariff move, eh? The guy still thinks he's right with tariffs. We're talking Trump. I digressed.
I think he's been much worse than, say, President Biden has been during his
Biden
4
did
years,
a great job.
right? And so I think we just kind of have to make peace with that, and Americans as well, is that like the Biden to Trudeau analogy is not one-to-one. And that like...
No, it's not. And nobody appreciates how good or great a job Biden he did. Good grammar. Great grammar. And also realigning and strengthening allied ties with NATO. Biden did a lot of good things, but where the Democratic Party falls short is in their messaging.
Pierre's rise is not simply a sort of equivalent that there's some sort of like mass kind of like right-wing reactionary MAGA-esque movement sweeping
Canada. There certainly is, but it's not MAGA. I think
it's just as simple as that Trudeau has not been that great at his job and that there's a lot of momentum behind someone who's promising an alternative, even though this is a just kind of very conventional, boring, fiscal conservative versus fiscal progressive.
No. This guy friggin' Pierre Poilievre, all he's done is attack. He's never provided any alternative solutions, just like Trump, not even a concept. He did come out, he said, well, he'd do some tax plans, tax cuts. Typical conservative thing. This is the truth.
Kind of clash of visions. And I think Trudeau...
You don't think that there's a big anti-woke groundswell about...
Oh, I think there's part of it, absolutely. But I'm sort of...
Anti-woke. That's a worldwide problem. Anti-woke. Which is another con job.
Saying that I think that, Pierre's rise to the prime ministership is a kind of somewhat less interesting political phenomenon and more...
Not just that. This guy, Pierre Poilievre, doesn't even have a security clearance. Does not even have a security clearance. So if you don't think there's a Trump friggin' parallel here, you're kissing the Blarney Stone. Because this Pierre Poilievre, I don't need a security clearance. He can't even be in on the top-level security level talks. Unbelievable.
Or sort of like the equivalent of, like an Obama-Romney type election.
Interesting. Okay. So I want to understand the Trump relationship here really quick, since this is an American channel.
An American channel. Tim, what do you think? Where do you think? We're all the same. Here's the deal, buddy. The United States, Canada, and Mexico really need to get stronger ties together to be able to deal with the geopolitical situation around the world. And this is a missed opportunity because of the idiotic political landscape on the 44th parallel and south. It's just mind-boggling, just the stupidity.
I don't know if you've had to file anything to come. I guess we're not paying you, so you don't have to, we don't have to make sure there's any cross-border trade issues developing. But Trump wrote this. The great state of Canada is stunned as the finance minister resigns or was fired from her position by Governor Justin Trudeau. It's a funny joke there about how Canada's a state. He goes on, her behavior was totally toxic and not at all conducive to making deals, which are good for the very unhappy citizens of Canada. She will not be missed. So to me, this is kind of like, so is Trudeau trying to deal with his domestic issues by buddying up, I don't know, by like kind of acting like he's going to make a deal with Trump, and then she is acting against that? Or is this just such an American-centric view of things?
No, here's the thing. Before this thing with Chrystia Freeland, the finance minister, blew up, Trudeau, with LeBlanc, that's going to replace her as finance minister, went down to meet Trump at Mar-a-Lago. And the reason why they did that was because of pressure from the premiers, which are a conservative party, like Ontario. It's the biggest GDP engine in the country. It's conservative. And out in Alberta, it's conservative. They're putting pressure because of the tariffs, because everybody's in a panic over the tariffs, which is dumb because... So what? Tariffs go into place? It's going to hurt everybody. So what? Let the chips fall where they fall if they got to fall. Let's work out a pragmatic plan that should be done irrespective of tariffs that benefits the U.S., Canada, and Mexico, instead of Ontario slagging Mexico for preferential treatment. That's no way to deal. We got a more serious situation. It's called BRICS, B-R-I-C-S, that we need to deal with. They're going to try to take the American dollar away as being the reserve currency of the world. And this is where people got to work together. This is where everybody's missing the mark.
What is the politics of this little trade dispute that is happening?
Well, I mean, I'm sure it will not shock you, Tim, for me to say that I don't think Trump knows at all what he's talking about in that particular fleet. I mean, because, like, in theory, like, Chrystia Freeland was fired or, like, left because she wasn't, like, left-wing enough. So it doesn't...
Whether this blew up or not doesn't matter. Trump would have done this because he's trying to pull a Putin. He's going to try to do a Crimea. Donbass. This is what he's really trying to do. This is what he's got his little pea brain.
It doesn't make sense that Trudeau would sort of be instinctively sympathizing with Trudeau in this position. Like Trudeau, I mean, Trump in theory... If
Trump is instinctively sympathizing with Trudeau because Trudeau came and met with him. And that's all Trump actually cares about, is that people like are nice to him and like rub his belly because his father...
That's correct, Tim. But furthermore, what you have to understand is Trudeau is one of the few people that embarrassed Trump. And he hasn't forgotten that. And this is payback time.
Father didn't hug him.
I guess so. Although that doesn't explain why Trump also feels the need to constantly call him Governor Trudeau. I mean, Trump like clearly is very pleased with himself, because I think he has just recently learned that Canadians often have this kind of like delicate sensitivity about being seen as, wannabe Americans or people that, are indistinguishable from Americans. So like Trump now is like really sort of pleased with himself and gets a rise out of constantly using this line about the 51st state and Governor Trudeau and all of that. But yeah, I mean, like obviously Trump has promised to impose tariffs on Canada on day one. This is something that looms very large in sort of the Canadian, news right now. And Chrystia Freeland, the finance minister, brought this up as one of the reasons why she doesn't have faith in Trudeau's economic management, that she sort of thinks that this is a sort of existential threat to the Canadian economy and is not being sort of treated as such. Instead, Trudeau is doing like sort of gimmicky tax breaks and things like that. So it's a very sort of serious crisis. I mean, I do think that
the gimmicky tax breaks are because of the Conservative governments here. And if he doesn't do the gimmicky tax breaks, then his support to stay in power would create a non-confidence vote, and we'd have an immediate non-confidence issue, and we'd have an immediate election. So let's be realistic about the two sides of the coin. It's like a quantum superposition. You spin that coin, you know what's going to happen. Going to happen this way or that way, depending on which way the coin falls. It's just the way it is.
Despite their ideological differences, Trudeau and Trump got along relatively well during Trump's first term. You know, they did renegotiate NAFTA. Chrystia Freeland was was foreign minister during those days, and I think had a productive relationship with Rex Tillerson, if we remember him.
What happened with Rex Tillerson? Trump 1 is totally different from Trump 2.0. And you got to remember Rex Tillerson, the State Department was totally gutted, so Tillerson had no support. But you got to remember what Rex Tillerson said about Trump. F, bleep, 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 moron. That's what he said about Trump.
So, you know, like it's not without, but the what's changed, though, is I do think that Trump has become much more radicalized against Trudeau because of the influence of people like Tucker and Elon Musk and Trump's actually new national security advisor who has tweeted.
Putin, Orban, Kim Jong-un, Xi Jinping, Modi, Prince of Saudi Arabia. Let's figure out the real influences. Trump, the Trump machine. Holy frig. Tom Hanks. Was that a shrimp boat? No, it's a Trump boat. You got to understand, and that's where the chancellor of 18 years, a woman, she resigned a few years ago. But this woman was Chancellor of Germany for 18 years. Grew up in East Germany. She seen the autocratic tendencies of Trump from day one, from a distance. She had experience with that stuff. She knew.
Did a number of like very explicitly anti-Trudeau things, pro-Pierre things. I think that sort of the MAGA world understands Trudeau in a more ideological way and sees him sort of like contiguous with sort of the American left in a way they didn't before. And, you know, as dopey as a lot of these MAGA people are, I think that they can read the headlines and they understand that Trudeau has one foot in the grave and that they're likely to get a conservative who will be much more ideologically sympathetic to them in just a few months. And I think it's not irrational for them to just have a view where they can wait Trudeau out and they don't really have an incentive to make a deal with him if someone better is coming in their mind.
Isn't the conservative side, though, in Canada worried about the tariffs and the
Absolutely. They're worried about the tariffs, and they want to fight back without tact. They don't know what they're doing. They're, you got this guy Doug Ford talking about cutting off energy to New York State, cutting off certain supplies of booze. And you got to understand, in Quebec, the huge aluminum trade, you'll never be able to replicate the trade. It's going to take years to create manufacturing to supplement or to supplant the trade that's already going back and forth. It's just not feasible. And this is why this trade war is the dumbest thing. But yeah, these guys in the Conservatives will not react in as pragmatic and balanced and measured way as the present Trudeau government will. Simple as that.
Like, additional tariffs are not going to be good for Canada. And so if you are coming in to the prime ministership as an ostensibly conservative, and you're supposed to be having this good relationship with Trump, but Trump is imposing these tariffs, which are going to be crippling for Canada, like, isn't that a bit of a briar patch for the conservatives in Canada?
Yeah, I mean, it's like nobody in Canada is in favor of Trump imposing tariffs on Canada. I mean, let's be clear about that. But I think the idea, like sort of rhetorically, the way it will play politically, is that Pierre will just kind of say, like, Trump or sort of Trudeau has mismanaged the relationship with Trump the way he's mismanaged everything. Like, I'll be a fight for Canada's interests. Trump will take me seriously. We'll have a good relationship, which I do think is probably true. Like, you can imagine Pierre picking up the phone the day after he's elected prime minister and being like, hey, Trump, how's it going? Like, we're sure great that we got rid of that woke, moron. And now we can like both focus on making this continent great. And like it you might not want to hear that as an American, but, just from a purely sort of self-interested Canadian perspective, I think it's.
Well, no, the point then is that like, this is all fake. It's all wrestling. And like,
bullshit.
If somebody comes in and is like, yeah, we're going to shut the illegals down off the northern border and you can have a press conference. And it's all that yesterday there's this Yoshi's son, the SoftBank guy that goes and has a press conference with Trump. It's like, I'm going to invest $100 billion in America.
Which he was going to do anyways.
SoftBank CEO is not making their investment decisions based on the election result. Like, they were going to invest in America based on their, doing what is right for shareholders. But they know that Trump likes this. And so maybe the notion here is that the little brother Canadian can go and like have a press conference with him where Trump feels like he's a winner, and then not actually do the tariffs.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think you make a fair point. The degree to which sort of foreign policy in a second Trump term is going to be defined a lot by, world leaders' sort of ability to play into Trump's fantasies about how the world works and to flatter him and to sort of, play into his narratives about how things are. And again, like,
where is this Canadian anti-Americanism, JJ? Why cannot somebody gain some political steam in Canada by being like, fuck this guy calling us the 51st state? He doesn't know what he's doing. He's an idiot. He wants to tariff us. Canadians are great. We don't need Trump. We don't need to go down and do a little dance for him in Mar-a-Lago. Like, we've got a great country here. We log. We have Mounties. Like, we have natural resources. Like, why isn't there some political hay to be made there?
I mean, anti-Americanism is a powerful force in Canadian politics, no doubt. But
anti-Americanism is bullshit. Anti-Trump is the way to go. Guy's dumber than a brick. But here's the issue. The United States, you've got to get your shit together, and you've got to, within 2 years, change the political landscape to make sure that you handcuff this guy Trump from the Congress. You failed. 2022, had a glimmer of hope. 2024, your electric base disappeared on you. They didn't show up. You got 2 years to change this thing. Because if Trump lives for another 10 years, he's going to be going for a third term if he can. Mark my words. This guy loves power. He doesn't care about anything. He doesn't care about the people. He just cares about what he can do. Trump 2.0 is totally different from Trump 1.0.
So is trade with America. I mean, Canada basically does all of it.
Exaggerate your accent, really focus on the aboot words, or like talking French Canadian.
Canada does basically all of its trade with America. Canada does more trade with the U.S. than every other country put together. It's upwards like 80. Something in the high 80s is the trade that we do with the U.S. So it is very existential, and there is no alternative. It has been tried for decades and decades and decades. As long as Canada has been a country, there has been this persistent insecurity about how.
No, we can firm up trade with Mexico. Logistically, it doesn't make sense because you got to go through the U.S. to Mexico. But we can firm up with Mexico because I'm going to tell you, Mexico is going to maybe go to BRICS. Xi Jinping has already been trying to woo Mexico to BRICS. So there's a bigger picture here that a lot of people are missing. And that's the BRICS card. Saudi Arabia, the big ally in the Middle East of the USA, is allied with Brazil, Russia, India, South Africa, other African countries, Iran, and Saudi Arabia is in there. Qatar, United Arab Emirates, and Saudi Arabia. So don't kid yourself. They want to take the American dollar out as the reserve currency of the world. Now, the other thing that nobody's talking about, if Canada and the Canadian dollar was the reserve currency, we could run up higher deficits like the Americans have. And this is where you've had the advantage, America, the dollar being the reserve currency of the world. And that's given you a major advantage around the world. And if you lose that, your situation is going to change a lot. Just saying.
How trade dependent we are with the United States and trying to trade more with, England or Europe or South America or wherever. But it never works because, you look at a map, the north to south sort of axis is the most logical sort of route to pass goods. And the Canadian and the US economy are so deeply integrated that we already sort of basically function as a single economic zone. The idea of imposing tariffs on Canada is like imposing tariffs on New York or California or something. It's completely economically irrational. And, traditionally, this relationship has been considered sacred by Canadians and Americans alike, just regardless of what their ideological sort of predilections are. Maintaining good sort of free flow of goods with Canada has always been uncontentious until now. So this is just, I think, one more example of a way in which, Trump is, just upending the apple cart.
I'm feeling very culturally disconnected from the Canadians with all this amiability. It's like I want some anger. I want some edge. All right. The other thing that you said, you did a video on this yesterday, which people should go watch, which is even more in the weeds than this for the super nerds out there. But there was one element of it I just wanted to follow up on before I lost you, and that is so you mentioned the trade. There's the NAFTA and then the USMCA that Trump renegotiated, which is between the three North American countries, and I guess there's some now interest in rejiggering that and just having a bilateral trade agreement between Canada and the U.S. Talk about that and the political implications of that conversation.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think so. Yeah, we in the old days, in the 80s, in 1989, we negotiated free trade between Canada and the U.S., Ronald Reagan and Brian Mulroney. This was a very big deal, very contentious, but, it passed. And then it became a subject of sort of like broad bipartisan consensus.
Excuse me, it was HW by 89 to close the deal.
Yeah, I guess to close the deal, it would have been
HW that came in and closed that deal. All right, let's not take anything away from Poppy Bush, but go ahead, continue, JJ.
Yeah. All right, well, anyway, so like...
Herbert Walker Bush. Yeah, but anyways, Brian Mulroney, they did the deal, FTA. Trump came into power. He wanted just like a dog that pees on a fire hydrant. Trump wants, I got to change it. Well, guess what? He rebadged it under a different name. Nothing really changed dramatically in any of the subsections of that agreement based on in a comparative to the original agreement. But Trump wanted to have his finger on it. It's the old Trump ego machine at work.
It had been a controversial idea in Canada just because of anti-Americanism, but then it became, it yielded great economic growth for Canada and became a bipartisan kind of thing. And then sort of in the early 90s, we expanded that relationship into NAFTA, which I think was really the first time that Americans paid much attention to this. And of course, NAFTA then became defined in the American imagination, not by the, successful Canada-U.S. dimension of it, but rather the Mexican-U.S. dimension of it. And it sort of became sort of bound up in all this populist anger about, the giant sucking sound and outsourcing and all that. And also now, I think, in the rise of Trump, sort of Mexican-U.S. economic relations have become very bound up in like the border and drugs and crime and all that kind of thing. And so I think there is a kind of like growing sense in Canada that Canada's economic interests should not be tied up in this American-Mexican drama that Canada has nothing to do with, right? Like if Trump seeks to sort of punish the NAFTA members, which in Trump's mind means Mexico, but inflicts collateral damage on Canada because he's pissed off at the border or whatever, like what is Canada getting out of this? You know, there was a sort of thinking that I think Mexico would grow into a much more important trade partner for Canada than it has. Canada still does very little trade with Mexico, certainly relative to our trade with the US. So there's just kind of a thinking that's like, let Mexico and America have their own trade relationship, let Canada and the US have our own trade relationship as we did in the 80s. It's not, I think that's a persuasive argument that would...
Sure, it's persuasive. Sounds good. Makes no sense, though. You need to open up the borders on both sides of the fence. Right from Mexico, straight through to Canada and back through. And here's one of the things that you got to remember. And this is where, whether it's the Republicans in the States, conservatives in Canada, bring up the immigration card. So there's two things that the Republicans and the conservatives are very good at doing. Creating fear. Fear of financial stability. Fear of immigration, which includes crime. You know, they do the crime thing. Crime's gone up, crime's gone up. Meanwhile, under Biden, crime actually went down, believe it or not. But that's what they do. They create fear. When they create fear, people automatically go into a flight and fight response. And that's factual. Once you understand that, this is what their card is, and this is how it works. And then the carrot, the common carrot of the Republican and the conservative parties is tax breaks. And then the cycle begins. The Democrats and the Liberals come back in, clean up the mess, get the economy in a good position, and then the Conservatives do the exact same thing. Time goes by, they get back in. When are you going to stop the friggin' carousel? That's the real question. When are you going to change the framework of the financial systems and how they work to be more conducive to all the people, all the time, instead of just the 1% and the 10%. And this is where you're losing the mark. Because population of the world over the last 50 years has changed dramatically. The currency system around the world and the framework that it's built upon has not been modified to adapt for that, and it's just not appropriate anymore. So when Trump and his administration, especially these billionaires, which I call oligarchs, you got a Putin oligarch system in place now. They talk about pain and suffering. Doesn't need to be pain and suffering. Things can be done a different way. But they're just going back to the old way of doing things, pain and suffering, and they always benefit by it. And this is where you got to understand things got to go differently. And you, the people, especially the people that didn't vote, need to get out there and express that and vote. Because you got 2 years to make a big change in how things go. And that's very, very important. Mark my words.
Make it possible for Canada to get things that you could never imagine a Trump administration, or I think even any American administration giving to Mexico, such as a thing that I'm quite passionate about, which would be to create free mobility of labor between Canada and the US, to let Canadians and Americans live and work in each other's countries without a visa in the same way, Australians and New Zealanders can, or people in the European Union can. You could never in a million years imagine any American administration giving that to Mexico, but I think
Why?
it's easy to imagine Canadians getting it.
Why? Why do you think that? Why do you think that is, JJ?
Well, because I think of all of the tensions with immigration and all that, and I mean, I'm not passing a value judgment here.
Disease at the end of the name. Maybe.
Well, it's like
too many Gutierrez's.
We're just conceding to political reality here, Tim. I mean, I'm not passing a moral judgment, but
I'm just teasing you. No, it's obviously true. And it's related to immigration. It's also related to racism, and it's related to just, I think, also economic, just realities. Like Canada is more closely an economic peer, and like the types of work that is being done cross border. I'm intrigued by that. I got some bad news for you. I think that's a great idea, actually, for Canada. But the problem is that Trump is not actually going to sign any new trade deals. All right, because that is going to require him having a proactive desire for for a global exchange, a cross-border exchange, and he doesn't really. He just wants to tear shit down and talk about how things are bad. And so
you don't think he'd like a big flashy signing ceremony with Lil Marco and all the other characters?
Yeah, up in Ottawa with some Mounties behind them.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think it's unlikely. I hear you, but I think that is unlikely, and I think that the particulars would be probably pretty challenging to negotiate, and they'd probably end up being pretty unfair to Canada. I just think that there are a lot of real challenges. Though the appeal of getting out of the Mexico part of the deal, and doing nativist appeals on that definitely would appeal to Trump. So talking about it, I think, is a good idea. Actually doing it, I wouldn't get your hopes up. Wow. I'm for you though. I'm with you. I wish we could have a YouTube exchange without visas, where you could just go from Vancouver down to Seattle and back and forth. That makes sense. It's obvious.
Yeah,
I'm skeptical.
Well, I mean, the fact is that Canadians need to come up with something, right? Like we need to come up with some sort of strategy to win Trump over, and I think also just in our own kind of self-interested way, something to get our economy back on track. The tariffs are going to be very destructive to the Canadian economy, but it's not like we were sitting pretty to begin with, and that's
Tariffs are going to be more destructive to the American economy than the Canadian economy. And by the time the American economy can recover, Trump will probably have ridden off into the sunset and things will have changed. And we strengthen trade with other parties. That's always the case. And this Trump does not understand. That's why now you need to strengthen trade with Mexico, Canada, and North America. But you got a president that guy's a moron. Bottom line. Trump is a moron. The Russian hoax is not a Russian hoax. A Canadian put it together, brought Trump into it. Goes back to Boris Yeltsin. And this guy Trump has been laundering money for the Colombian cartel, Mexican cartel, and the Russians, many decades. Why do you think Martinelli from Panama ended up going to jail? David Guzman in jail in Miami.
Why Trudeau is going to be losing his bid for a fourth term in the first place.
Woof. Okay. JJ, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. I'm going to sign off, and with that note, love and peace to everybody. So thanks for watching. Love and peace to everybody. And remember, you're feeling stressed, you're not sure what to do, relax. You can sit on the couch and do nothing, and do what my two buddies do. Take care. Love and peace to everyone.